Hello, in this Cocos2d-x multi-device design 2.0 series, we're going to show you how to create a scene in C++. If you are interested in JavaScript, we've got a video for that, so check that out as well. So over the past few videos, we've covered how to actually set up your project. So it uses our multi-device design philosophy 2.0, how to create backgrounds, how to create assets, and sort of how to position them, but we've only talked about it and done it within Photoshop. We haven't done any code to actually position items. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to basically sort of create an example menu which has all the different features in terms of positioning to allow you to create any type of scene. So I've got a bunch of assets already added. Got game background. This will be centered in the X and the Y axis. Got a play button which will be centered on the screen as well. Got a Facebook button and a Twitter button. These buttons will be positioned in the top left and the top right. I haven't decided which one's going to go in the top left and in the top right. That doesn't really matter. And then we got a sound on button or sound button, and that will be positioned along the bottom, but it'll be centered in the x-axis, which will be really cool. And this will show you how you can actually position different items all over your screen and have them run on different devices. We're going to run them on an iPad, so you can see basically a 4:3 ratio with a 3:4 ratio, because what I have already done is set my project to portrait mode. But if you want landscape mode, that's fine as well. By default it comes in landscape mode, the Cocos2d-x project does, but you can just switch it via this. So just change device orientation to landscape or portrait, wherever you want. And then in terms of our side, you just need to comment this out. If you want portrait, it says right there, comment out for a portrait game. And well, if you want landscape, you uncomment it. So leave that as it is, because like I said, this is a portrait game. And where were we? Oh yeah, so we was just talking about our assets. We got our game background, Facebook, play button, sound on, Twitter. We're going to be doing it in portrait mode, and I was just telling you we're going to be trying it on an iPad, on an iPhone 4, iPhone 5, iPhone 6 or 6S, doesn't really matter. I'm not going to try it on an Android device. I've already tried it, I already know that it works, and I just want to get this point across as best as I can. Though I'm doing this video on Xcode and I'm doing it for iOS and I'm doing it on a Mac, it doesn't mean you can't do it on Android. Because I know there's been some confusion with some of our other videos, because I mainly work on Xcode. I prefer Xcode and I prefer iOS development, but for the most part all of our other Cocos2d-x videos have been valid for Android. The code is no different. It's just you would use something like Eclipse or Android Studio, something along those lines, but the code has been the same. That's the same principle for this, and like I said, I've tested this and it works on Android, so you'll be all good to go. So hopefully that's all clear. And now we can basically start creating our game. First of all, you want to create a couple of variables. The first is going to be the screen size, and what I should say, the visible screen size, because we have a canvas size, or I'm calling it a canvas size, which is basically this design resolution size right here. But your screen, for example, if it's the iPhone 5, might be 640 by 1136. So in the x-axis we'll have a bit cut off, and as a result we only really want to deal with what we can see. And to do that, we get visible size equals director get instance get visible size. Next we're going to do vec2 origin equals director get instance get visible origin, and the origin is essentially going to be used to help offset anything that's hidden. Because the example that I gave you, iPhone 5, the screen size is 640 by 1136 in a portrait orientation, so you would have bits missing on the left and the right because they're not within the screen size of that particular device. And we need the origin because we're going to be adding the origin on, so it gets, or it sort of eliminates that sort of positioning, that sort of area. You'll understand what we mean when we start coding it a bit more. And first of all, we're going to add our background. I'm going to use sprites for everything, but the principle is exactly the same if you're using, let's say, a menu item, a UI button, or literally any other image. Setting the position is exactly the same because we're not trying to create a functional scene, but a scene that looks how it should do on the different devices. So we're going to do sprite asterisk background equals sprite colon create, and in here we're going to do game background.png. I've got all the assets right here, already added them. There'll be a link in the description to the GitHub source code, which will have this source code, so you can check that out as well. We're going to do background set anchor point. We'll set the anchor point to 0.5 and 0.5. For some of you experienced developers, and more specifically experienced Cocos 2D-X developers out there, you might be thinking, well, the anchor point for a sprite is set to 0.5 by default, and what that means is it's when you position it or when you do something with it, it does it according to the center of this node, this sprite background. And you're correct, it is. But certain items, I believe certain UI items and potentially menu items, but I have come across item nodes or objects in Cocos 2D-X that has their anchor point set to 0, 0 or something else by default. And as a result, if you have different anchor points, that can sort of cause confusion and basically mess up your UI if you forget to basically keep it uniform. So we're just gonna set everything to 0.5, 0.5. Just make sure you do that, and you can easily, once you're done, just comment it out and see if there's a change. And that way you know, well, sprite is okay, or if you comment it out for a UI button and you realize, well, that's messed it up, and then you can say, well, the only thing I've changed is the anchor point. Then you know that that particular item has a different anchor point. So that's the whole reason why we're setting the anchor point, but it's essentially redundant code, but it's something just to keep in mind and just so you know what is happening. We're going to do background set position. Now this is where the meat of our design philosophy comes in. So I'm going to put vec2, and we're going to center this in the x-axis. So we're going to do visible size dot width divide by 2, because the visible size is the whole screen width. Then we want to divide it by 2 so it's centered. I'm going to do plus origin dot x. You might be thinking, why are we adding origin dot x? Like I was saying before, because on an iPhone 5, for example, you would have essentially areas of your design resolution size cut off on the left and the right, and we want to help get rid of that, because if you didn't and you were to just position it without this, then it would position it as if the left wasn't the left of the screen but the left of the design resolution, and that would start off the screen. So to get around this, you just put origin.x. For a device, or if you can find a device that has, let's say, a resolution of 768 by 11 or by 1136 or that same ratio, then origin.x and origin.y should be 0. And adding 0 to something doesn't change it, so it's okay anyway. But just make sure you add origin.x and origin.y. And for the Y position, we're going to do the same. So visible size dot height divided by 2 plus origin dot Y. We're going to do this, add child background. And before we move on and start creating our other items and positioning them accordingly, I just want to mention one thing. So we've set the position, we've factored in origin.x and origin.y. If, for example, you were to create another item, whether it's a sprite, menu item, doesn't really matter, and you were to position it relative to another object, so let's just say I created another sprite and I wanted it in the same position as the background, but I wanted it 200 pixels to the left, so the Y doesn't change but the X does. You wouldn't actually, when you set the position, do plus origin and plus origin Y, because it's already been factored in once. You would just get the position of the background, do whatever you wanted to it, so minus 200 pixels in the left, Y we're not going to change, but you wouldn't add origin again because we've already factored in. Just something to bear in mind, because we're not going to be doing anything like that in this series, but it's just something that you probably will be doing, positioning items according to the position of other items. Like I said, just make sure if you factored in origin in one item and another item is being positioned by factoring in the position of that item, don't factor in origin again. And now we're going to do sprite play equals sprite create, and in here we're going to put play button.png. We're actually just going to copy and paste this, change this to play, and that's it, because we're setting the anchor point and we want the play button to be centered in the X and the Y axis, so we can just reuse this code. Next, we're going to add the sound on button, and like I said, we're going to be positioning this in the X axis, aka centered in the X axis, and we want it flush to the bottom of the screen, and we want it always on the bottom of the screen. So whether that's an iPhone 4, something like an iPhone 5 which is taller, something like an iPad which is slightly wider, we want it always on the bottom, and we'll show you how to do that. So sprite, and we're just going to call this sound equals sprite : create, and in here I'm going to put sound on.png. we're going to put sound set anchor point, all simple stuff. The anchor point is always going to be the same, 0.5 0.5. My thinking, especially the experienced developers out there, can I still change the anchor point if I want to, let's say 0.1 or 0.9, because remember it's normalized, so it ranges between 0 and 1. Technically it can go higher, but I'm not really going to go into that. You can still change it as long as you adjust your position code accordingly, and I'm sure if you know what you're doing with anchor point, you'll know how to adjust that. We're going to do sound set position vec2, and for this we can actually take the X part of the background or the play button code, because we're centering it in the X axis but we're aligning it on the bottom of the screen in the Y axis. And to do that, we don't need the visible size.height, because if I just open this simulator that I've got open, by default when you add an item to Cocos 2DX, it's added in the bottom left. So if we want to keep it at the bottom, we don't need to add the screen height. But like I said before, with the anchor point that's set to 0.5 0.5, the item's bottom left isn't touching the bottom left of the screen, but the center of the item is. So all we need to do, because by default half of it will be missing, the top half will be visible, bottom half will be off screen. To get rid of that issue, you do sound get content size dot height divide by 2 plus origin.y, and by doing sound get content size, because I could put a magic number, I don't actually know what the height of the sound button is, but for example let's just say it's 100 pixels. If I only want to move it up by half of the height of the sound button, I could put plus. I could replace this with 50 pixels. But the issue with that is, what if I were to change the sound button during development or during an update and it's now 120 pixels or 80 pixels? It will no longer be flush to the bottom of the screen. So that's the reason you want to remove magic numbers and do dynamic positioning using getting size and getting position. So finally we can just do this, add child sound, and now the next step is to do sprite. You know what, I'm gonna have Twitter in the top left equals sprite create twitter.png Twitter, set anchor point like I said before, vec2 0.5. This is basically the thing that stays the same. We can do Twitter, set position. So this is where we have to think for a moment, because we're going to position this in the top left, so that will be right here, but by default it starts here. So we need to move it up in the y-axis, but let's deal with the x because that comes first. You might be thinking, oh, it's already fine, but remember the top left isn't already in the top left of the screen, it's the middle of the Twitter sprite. So we need to do Twitter get content size dot width divide by 2 plus origin dot x. So what that does, it gets the Twitter width divided by 2, basically half of the Twitter button's width, and moves it that much to the right. So that way anything that was off the screen, which was basically the left half of the Twitter button, is now on screen. And now what we need to do is position the y-axis. So what we can do, because by default it's at the bottom here, we need to move it up. To do that, it's simple. Visible size dot height plus origin dot y. You might be tempted to just leave this and then move on to the Facebook button or anything else that you're doing, but remember the anchor point is set to 0.5, 0.5. So what we need to do is factor in half of the Twitter sprite. So minus Twitter get content size dot height divide by 2. And I'm just going to enclose this in brackets just to make sure that this is getting calculated first. It should be, but just in case it isn't, I'm just going to enclose it in brackets. If in doubt, enclose it in brackets. That's basically my philosophy in coding when you're doing math calculations, or math calculations in general. Twitter, and we can actually copy and paste this for Facebook because a lot of it is going to be the same. Just change this to Facebook. Oopsie daisy. Copy and paste that, paste that, paste that. Facebook.png. I'll change these as well. So just change that right there. For the height, it stays the same because even though it's in the top right, it's still flush to the top of the screen. So we don't need to change this at all apart from changing what size we're getting. But because it's actually, not only is it flush to the top, it's flush to the right side of the screen. The principle is exactly the same as what we've done here. We can copy this because we're moving it all the way to the opposite end of the screen, and for this is the x-axis, and then bringing it back a little bit because we've got anchor points set to the center of the Facebook button. Just need to change a couple of things. Change that to width, change that to width, and finally change origin.y to x. So that's it, we're actually ready to run. So I'm just going to run this in the simulator. First of all, I'm just showing it on an iPad. Once we've seen that it's working and I haven't made any mistakes, I'll show you on iPhone 4, iPhone 5 and iPhone 6. So there you go, we got our background which is centered. everything looks fine, though technically, I'm actually just going to open up the game background right here. So if I just press side by side, as you can see, part of the top of the background, part of the top background is missing and part of the bottom background is missing. But when we're looking at the iPad screen, it doesn't look like it's missing. It doesn't look like something's cut off. It looks fantastic, and that's because we're using the philosophies that we laid out in the background creation video. So check that out. On the left and the right, nothing is cropped, and this is in the top left, this is in the top right, this is in the middle, and this is at the bottom but centered in the x-axis. You might be thinking, look, this looks great on an iPad, but how about something that's basically wider in screen? We'll show you right now. Well, let's go on to an iPhone 6s, 6s, 6, essentially the same thing really. Even 5, the ratio is very similar, but I'll show you on 5 because 6s was launched at the same time. 5 was obviously, 5s was a year before that, and we've actually got, not 6s, 6 and 6 Plus, that's what I wanted to say. And 6s and 6s Plus is essentially the same, just faster, but that's irrelevant for the positioning. As you can see, it looks great, but let's just scale it down a bit so you can see all of it. As you can see, though this is a taller device, still positioned in the X and Y axis, aka the background is still centered. We can see all of the top and all of the bottom of the background, but part of the left and the right of the background is cut off. But again, when you look at it, you don't feel that something's cropped, something's missing, because the philosophies we laid out in the background creation video is coming into effect. Play button is in the center. This is positioned at the bottom in the center of the x-axis, top left, top right. I think you're getting the picture, but let's just show you iPhone 5. So it's waiting a couple of seconds for the iPhone 5 to build. Here we go. If your build process takes longer than this, most likely it will, simply because I already built it in advance for these different simulators, so that way we weren't waiting around while it was building, or not an immense amount of time. Don't worry, just be patient. As you can see, still looking fantastic. And finally, let's show you on the old ratio of 2:3. This is such an old ratio. Generally speaking, you wouldn't create games for this device. iPhone 4, iPhone 4S, it's just so old. But a little fun fact, ain't fun, but my dad's still got an iPhone 4. I was using it the other day and I was thinking, damn, this is old. But ignoring the device that my dad has, as you can see, it's got everything positioned in the top left and the top right. This is centered, this is at the bottom, and the background is fully visible. I'm looking at it, and earlier in this video, because this video is actually quite long, but there's a lot to cover in here, I said if you can somehow find a device that has the same ratio of 768 by 1136, you'll be able to basically see the full canvas. But I think the iPhone 4 it seems like it's the same ratio. Let's just do some basic maths. This is sort of irrelevant, I'm just going off on a tangent. So 640 divided by, actually I'll just do 960 divided by 640 equals 1.5, because half of 640 is 320, add that to 640 is 960. I believe 1136 divided by 768, I believe half of 768 is 384. 768 plus 384 equals, no, it's slightly off, because if you have a look, it's something along the lines of like 1152. So yeah, it is slightly off. So you can't, see the entire screen size, but it's not as much is cut. But that's irrelevant. It's just something I was looking at and I was thinking, is it fully visible? If my maths are correct, maths 786. Actually 76. Actually, well, 1 second. This is bugging me now. So half of it is 384. When you add that, okay, yeah, that's fine. Ignore that. So that's how you use our multi-design philosophy and create scenes so they work on literally every iOS device, on every Android device. Though we used Xcode in this video, you can easily use Android, basically Eclipse, Android Studio. You can design on Windows with Eclipse, whatever. The process is exactly the same. I just prefer using Xcode. Just a couple of finishing notes. If, for example, this is very common when you're creating this, because we've created this and we've positioned them sort of flush with different stuff. So this is in the center, this is top left, top right, flush with the bottom. But what if I'm looking at this button and I'm thinking, I actually want the center of this button to be 10% up from the bottom of the screen. You wouldn't do the manual calculation yourself, so you wouldn't get the height, which is 960 pixels. So divide that by 10 is 96. You wouldn't add 96. That's not what you want to do. That'll look great on this device, but not on other devices. Make it dynamic. So you go to something like sound button, and instead of doing this, because like I said, we want the center of it 10% from the bottom, you do visible size, the height, because you're factoring in the height to 0.1, and this way the sound button will be positioned in the same place in the x-axis, so centered, but in the y-axis it's 10% up from the bottom. So that's the way you would design your game. I'm actually going to leave it like this because it actually looks a lot better. So this is how you would design your game when you're coding it. If you wanted, let's say you're creating a brick breaker game and you've got one single row of bricks and you want those bricks to be positioned 75% from the bottom, or a different way to look at it is 25% from the top. You wouldn't do any manual calculations. You would just do something like visible size dot height times by 0.75, because like I said, though you could look at it as 25% from the top, because everything starts at the bottom in Cocos 2DX, you have to work your way up, not work your way down. So if you want it from 25% from the top, you just do 100 minus 25, which is 75, divide that by 100, so you get 0.75, so visible size, the height, times by 0.75. There's a lot to take in, but it's well worth it, because once you start developing using this philosophy, you've got one set of assets which has multiple benefits. One, it's less hassle for the artist, it's less hassle for whoever is resizing them and saving them out. It's ridiculous amounts of time has been saved using this philosophy for us, and hopefully will be for all you developers out there. It also saves on storage space on your device, and that's very crucial. The smaller your app can be, the better, and it produces less processing requirements. Less processor requirements, because you have, generally speaking, lower res assets. But on a high-end device, as we showed you, even on an iPad Pro, though this was obviously only on a small simulator, it still looks fantastic. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on our education platform, sonarlearning.co.uk/question.php. There'll be a link in the description. Like I said earlier in this video, there'll be another link in the description to the source code from this video and the source code from basically every other video in this series, and the multi-res templates that we've covered in previous videos. Please rate, comment and subscribe, as it really does help us understand what you like and what you don't like about our videos. And as usual, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.